Have you ever walked into a new place full of hope, only to feel the chill of unspoken judgment before you even opened your mouth? Like you were already an exhibit before you even said hello. That's exactly how it felt for James Milner the moment he stepped through the grand doors of Northwood Academy in the affluent suburb of Greenfield. His old school back in Atlanta was a vibrant canvas walls covered in student murals, the echo of beatboxing from a stairwell, a constant hum of raw, uninhibited energy. Northwood. It was a gleaming monument to order. The glass windows reflected the world too perfectly. The floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the hallways stretched out with an almost unsettling neatness, like a place designed for robots, not teenagers. His mom called the move a fresh start. His dad, always more direct, called it a necessary change. James wasn't sure what to call it yet, but the moment he walked in, he could feel it. People were looking. Not staring, that would be too obvious. But the quick glances, the barely whispered comments, the way some students eyed him from head to toe before swiftly turning away. It all screamed the same thing. Who's this guy? James wasn't small for a 16-year-old. At 5'10", he carried the kind of lean, controlled muscle that came from years of relentless discipline. He moved with a quiet confidence, his posture straight steps measured. A silent testament to the martial arts training his father had drilled into him since he was old enough to stand. To them, though, he must have looked like just another outsider. Because he was. He made it to the front office without incident, collecting his schedule from an overly polite receptionist whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. As he walked out, a group of students near the lockers caught his attention. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with perfectly styled blonde hair was leaning casually against a locker, flanked by two others who laughed at something he'd just said. Their laughter wasn't loud. It was the kind meant to be overheard just enough to make sure the target knew they were the joke. James wasn't the target yet, but he could feel the slow, calculating assessment directed his way. This was Chadwick "Chad" Hayes, the school's star athlete and unofficial king according to the roster James had glanced at earlier. Chad's gaze wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the kind of look someone gave when they were deciding whether or not to make a problem out of you. James had seen it before, countless times in different places from different faces. Chad smirked, leaned toward one of his friends, and said something low enough that James couldn't quite hear. The two others chuckled, looking at James just a little too long. James exhaled slowly through his nose. His father's voice, a steady anchor in his mind, echoed the same advice he'd been given 100 times. Strength isn't about showing off. It's about knowing when to walk away. So he walked away, ignoring it. He had nothing to prove. But the thing about guys like Chad, they don't like being ignored. They thrive on easy targets, on kids who shrink back, who laugh nervously, who don't know how to respond. James wasn't one of those kids, and that he'd soon learn would be his biggest challenge. Because while James wanted a fresh start, some people only saw a new target, and the sterile, orderly hallways of Northwood Academy were about to become a very different kind of battlefield. The quiet judgment was about to give way to something sharper, and the pressure cooker was slowly building steam. The quiet judgment soon gave way to something sharper. Not outright attacks, but subtle cuts designed to test, to provoke, to remind you of your place. They were a pressure cooker slowly building steam, and James was squarely in the pot. James had been at Northwood Academy for less than a week, but he already understood the unspoken rules. The school had its own quiet hierarchy. The athletes led by Chadwick "Chad" Hayes ran things. The wealthy kids acted like royalty. Everyone else just found a way to exist without drawing attention. James, with his quiet confidence and disciplined demeanor, was somewhere in between. He wasn't loud, wasn't looking for trouble, but he also wasn't timid. And that alone made him stand out. People like Chad thrive on easy targets. Kids who shrink back. Kids who laugh nervously when insulted, kids who don't know how to respond. James wasn't one of those kids, but Chad was determined to make him one. It started small. In the hallways, a shoulder bump that wasn't accidental muttered just loud enough for James to hear, "Watch where you're going." A notebook accidentally knocked off his desk in history class. Chad would flash that smirk afterward like he was testing something waiting for a reaction. James gave him nothing. His father's voice echoed discipline. Control. Then came the comments. They weren't screams, but whispers sharp enough to cut. Didn't know they let kids from the projects in here, Milner. It was said casually, leaning against a locker as James walked past. Or in the lunch line. You ever think about trying out for basketball? I mean, you people are good at that, right? The words were delivered with a mocking innocence, often followed by a snicker from Brock or Drew. Man, you're quiet, Chad would taunt. No smart comebacks, thought your kind was supposed to be funny. The worst part, Chad never said it outright in front of a teacher. It was always just low enough that the wrong person could dismiss it as a joke. Just subtle enough that Chad could shrug and act innocent if someone called him out. And the others? They laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make James's hands tighten into fists under his desk, his jaw clenching. Have you ever felt those subtle cuts? Those words that aren't quite insults, but sting deep down because you know their true meaning. It's a common tactic, isn't it? To make you question yourself, to wear you down slowly. Many would simply internalize it, feeling the shame or anger, but remaining silent. The pressure builds a silent scream trapped inside. James thought about telling his dad, but he already knew the response. Handle it with discipline. Don't stoop to their level. And his mom, she'd worry she'd tell him to talk to a teacher. But James knew that wouldn't help. Northwood Academy wasn't going to punish one of its star athletes over something they couldn't prove. And the system, he quickly realized, was designed to protect its own, often at the expense of someone like him. So James handled it like he always had. He ignored it. At least that was the plan. He understood that these subtle biases, these daily microaggressions, were like a pressure cooker slowly building steam. Every muttered insult, every dismissive glance, every accidental shove added to the internal heat. He was disciplined, yes, but even the strongest steel has a breaking point. And Chad, in his arrogance, was about to find it. The stage was set, the audience unaware of the hidden power coiled within this quiet new kid. Because every calculated silence eventually demands a defiant sound. The pressure cooker was about to blow, and when it did, the sterile halls of Northwood Academy would finally learn the true meaning of control. The fuse was lit. The pressure cooker about to blow. But what they didn't know was that James wasn't just a quiet kid. He was a master of control, a student of movement, a silent storm waiting for the perfect moment. It was lunch period Friday. James had just sat down with his tray, minding his own business, when a shadow fell over his table. Chad flanked by. Brock and Drew loomed behind him. Chad grinned loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Man, I've been wondering, he drawled. How come you don't talk much, Milner? What cat got your tongue? James didn't respond. He took a bite of his food, chewing slowly, deliberately. That answer wasn't good enough for Chad. With a sudden swift motion, Chad snatched the apple off James's tray and tossed it across the cafeteria. It landed with a dull thud near the drink station, rolling to a stop. A few heads turned. Students stopped eating forks halfway to their mouths, waiting. James set his fork down carefully, almost meticulously. He looked at Chad, meeting his eyes for the first time all week. Chad, mistaking James's silence for fear, smiled. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. He shoved James's shoulder hard, a forceful public challenge loud enough for everyone to hear. Come on, Milner, do something. The cafeteria froze. Conversations cut short. The scraping of plastic trays against tables stopped. Even the lunch staff behind the counter paused, watching from a distance. Chad Hayes had just shoved James Milner in front of everyone, and now everyone was waiting to see what he'd do. James sat still for a moment, his mind already calculating. His father's words rang in his head. You don't fight with anger. You fight with control. Slowly, he pushed his chair back. He stood up. No rush. No panic. His movements were precise, effortless, like a man stretching before a workout. Chad's smirk widened. Oh, we got a tough guy, he sneered, looking at his friends. You gonna swing, Milner? You gonna act like a thug now? James's expression didn't change. He just tilted his head slightly, examining Chad like he was an equation that didn't quite add up. That was the moment Chad realized something was off. James wasn't nervous. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't even blinking. The grin on Chad's face faltered just a fraction. A flicker of hesitation, a slight shift in his weight. Like some deep primal instinct was kicking in, warning him that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake. But it was already too late. Chad, fueled by ego and disbelief, reached out, shoving James again. This time, James moved. Fast. Before Chad's hands could fully extend, James's left hand shot up, gripping Chad's wrist in one smooth motion. His right hand came up next, lightning-quick controlled clamping onto Chad's elbow. Then, with zero apparent effort, James pivoted just slightly, using Chad's own momentum against him. Chad's feet left the ground. His back slammed onto the cafeteria floor with a sickening thud before he even knew what had happened. A sharp, stunned silence filled the room. Chad gasped, genuinely shocked, his body sprawled on the tile. He scrambled to sit up, eyes wide, confused. His friends took a hesitant step forward, but James didn't even look at them. Instead, he crouched down next to Chad, his voice low even. "Don't touch me again." No threats, no insults. Just a simple, chilling statement. And that's what made it so much worse. Chad wasn't just beaten. He was utterly dismissed. James stood up calmly, dusted off his hands like he'd just moved a chair instead of a person, and picked up his tray. He didn't even look back as he walked away. The cafeteria was still dead silent. Students stared at Chad, at James, at each other. Then, somewhere in the back, a single voice whispered, "Holy sh..." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into excited conversations. Someone had caught the whole thing on their phone. Someone else was already texting about it. And Chad. He stayed sitting there on the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into tight white-knuckled fists. Because he knew. By the time the last bell rang, everyone in Northwood Academy would be talking about what just happened. This wasn't over. But the fight as they all knew it had just begun. The silence in the cafeteria was shattered. But the shockwaves were just beginning. Because while James had won the battle, the real war was about to begin. A war fought not with fists, but with influence and lies. By the time the final bell rang that Friday, the story had already spread across Northwood Academy like wildfire. James had dropped Chad Hayes in the cafeteria. Not with a wild punch, not with some messy brawl, but with one clean, effortless move. And that's what made it so impossible to ignore. If James had thrown hands, if there had been a sloppy fight, it would have been different. It would have been just another school scuffle. Kids would pick sides, rumors would twist the details, and eventually it would fade. But this was something else. James had made Chad look weak. He had made him look helpless. And in a place like Northwood Academy, that wasn't something people forgot. James walked out of the school building ignoring the whispers. Some kids watched him like they were seeing him for the first time. Others whispered the moment his back was turned. A few just looked outright nervous. Chad wasn't waiting outside. That would have been too obvious. But James wasn't stupid. He knew how this worked. Guys like Chad didn't take embarrassment lightly. They didn't just get up, dust themselves off, and move on. They waited. They plotted. They made sure that when they got their revenge, it was worth it. James had seen it before in different cities, different schools. He knew this wasn't over. At home, he barely made it through dinner before his mom noticed. She had that way of looking at him, that way of tilting her head slightly, like she was scanning his face for hidden details. "Everything okay at school?" she asked, setting down her fork. His dad, sitting across from him, glanced up too. James shrugged. "Yeah, just a regular day." His mom didn't buy it. His dad just kept eating. That was the difference between them. His mom asked questions. His dad waited for answers. Black parents especially often have to navigate the fine line between protecting their children and preparing them for a world that might not always be fair. Later that night, James's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you're tough. You got lucky today. A second one. Watch your back. James stared at the screen, then exhaled, locked his phone, and set it face down on his desk. This wasn't unexpected. It wasn't even surprising. But now he had a choice to make. Would he let this go, pretend it never happened? Or would he make sure Chad and everyone else understood exactly who he was? Because whatever happened next, it was coming. Victory isn't always final. True adversaries often fight not with fists, but with power privilege and a willingness to twist the truth. The real twist wasn't about Chad's next move. It was about his father. Monday morning, everything felt different. James could tell before he even stepped inside the school. The sideways glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked past. It was all the confirmation he needed. The story had officially grown legs. By the time he reached his locker, 2 freshmen had already darted out of his way. A junior he didn't even know gave him an approving nod. And then there were the ones who suddenly wanted to be his friend. Yo, Milner, you really put haze on his butt, huh? Dude, I heard you barely even touched him. He just dropped like a sack of bricks. James ignored most of it. This wasn't respect. This was entertainment. They weren't looking at him like a person. They were looking at him like a spectacle, a rumor come to life. And that's when he saw Chad. Standing by his usual spot near the main entrance, but something had changed. The usual cocky smirk was gone. The easy confidence missing. Instead, Chad stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't alone. Brock and Drew flanked him just like always, but now they weren't laughing. Chad met James's gaze for half a second, then he looked away. James almost smirked. Almost. But he knew better than to think Chad had given up. Guys like him didn't just accept a loss. They waited for a rematch. Lunch was worse. James could feel it before he even sat down. The air was thick with expectation. People watched him like they were waiting for something to happen, like they thought Chad might storm across the cafeteria for a round 2. But Chad wasn't even in the room. His usual table was empty. James had just started eating when someone sat across from him. Not one of Chad's guys. A girl. Ava Sinclair. He hadn't spoken to her before, but he knew who she was. Smart, confident, never the type to follow the crowd. She set her drink down and studied him for a second. Then she said, "You know you didn't just beat Chad." James took a bite of his food, chewed, swallowed. "You humiliated him," Ava finished. "And his dad is trying to get you expelled." James barely reacted. "For what?" Ava scoffed. "They don't need a reason. He's claiming you attacked Chad, that it was unprovoked. He's pulling strings to make it stick." James wasn't surprised. He'd seen this play out before in different places with different faces, but always the same script. A white kid starts something, a black kid finishes it, and suddenly the rules don't apply the same way. The system designed to protect was about to be weaponized. He ran a hand over his face, inhaling slowly. "So what do I do?" Ava hesitated, then her eyes hardened with a quiet resolve. "Fight back. Not with fists, with proof." For the first time since Friday, James felt something he hadn't before. Not anger, not annoyance, curiosity. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be another cafeteria fight. It was going to be a battle for the truth waged through a crooked lens, and James knew he couldn't face it alone. The pressure was immense. The system was rigged. But James wasn't alone. Because sometimes the light of truth shines brightest when fueled by unexpected allies and unwavering courage. By Wednesday, the energy at Northwood Academy had shifted again. Chad Hayes wasn't just avoiding James, he was actively erasing him. No more comments, no more smug glances, no more games. Nothing. For some, that would have been enough. James had won. Wasn't that the point? But something still felt off. And that feeling only grew stronger when Ava Sinclair found him after last period. She didn't waste time. "Chad's dad is trying to get you expelled." James barely reacted. He'd seen this play out before in different places with different faces, but always the same script. A white kid starts something, a black kid finishes it, and suddenly the rules don't apply the same way. The powerful simply redraw the lines of justice. For what? James asked, his voice steady. Ava scoffed. They don't need a reason. He's claiming you attacked Chad, that it was unprovoked. He's pulling strings to make it stick. James ran a hand over his face, inhaling slowly. He knew this was the real fight, the one that mattered most. It wasn't about physical dominance. It was about protecting his future, his record, his very presence at Northwood. He looked at Ava, her eyes resolute. So what do I do? Ava didn't hesitate. Fight back. Not with fists, with proof. That night, James got to work. With Ava's sharp mind and tireless effort, they compiled everything. Screenshots of the anonymous threatening texts. The full cafeteria fight footage, not just the viral takedown clip showing Chad's initial aggression and James's controlled response. And then the critical piece witnesses. Students who had seen the subtle bullying, the accidental bumps, the jokes. Kids who, after seeing James's quiet strength, were now willing to speak up. The next morning, when James walked into Northwood Academy for the disciplinary meeting in Principal Davies' office, he wasn't alone. Ava was with him, a quiet but firm presence by his side. And then the unexpected. 2 other students' kids he barely knew before. All this walked in their faces, serious. Kids who had been in the cafeteria, who knew the truth. They were scared, but they knew what was right. This was the final twist. The power of solidarity. Mr. Hayes, Chad's father, a formidable figure in a tailored suit, presented his case first. He spoke of unprovoked violence, of safety concerns, of protecting the students of Northwood. His narrative was smooth practiced, designed to demonize James and protect his son's image. Then it was James's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make grand statements. He simply laid out the truth meticulously, calmly. The timestamps from the video footage. The corroborating statements from Ava and the other 2 students describing the pattern of bullying. The screenshots of the texts. Each piece of evidence was a brick systematically dismantling Mr. Hayes' carefully constructed wall of lies. The principal, a weary woman who had seen too much, watched with growing realization. By the time the meeting ended, Mr. Hayes didn't get what he wanted. James wasn't expelled. He wasn't suspended. Nothing stuck. Because the truth wasn't just on his side. It was undeniable. Chad didn't come back to school for the rest of the week. When he finally returned, he wasn't the same. Quieter. Less confident. He kept his head down, his voice lower. He wasn't afraid of James in the way he'd expected. He understood. James hadn't just beaten him in a fight. He had beaten him where it really mattered, in the battle for dignity, truth, and accountability. And that's what people remembered. Justice isn't always served. It's often fought for. And when you stand for truth, even unexpected allies will rise to meet you. Sometimes the most powerful resistance is simply refusing to be silenced. James never asked for respect. He never asked for attention. He just wanted to exist without being tested, without being challenged, without having to prove himself over and over again. But the reality is, some people only learn through consequences. And when you finally show them what you're capable of, not with anger, but with control, with truth, and with the courage to stand your ground, they never forget. His fight wasn't just for him. It was an echo of a larger struggle, a testament to resilience, and a beacon for anyone who dares to demand fairness in a world that isn't always fair. If James's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued simply because of who you are, know this: your voice matters. Your experience matters. Don't let anyone make you invisible. Speak up. Trust your gut. Demand the respect you've earned, not just for yourself, but for every single person who might walk through that door after you. Hit that like button if you've faced similar walls, subscribe to join our community, and share your own stories in the comments below. Let's keep these conversations going, because when we stand together, the invisible walls begin to crumble. So if James's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued simply because of who you are, know this: your voice matters. Your experience matters. Don't let anyone make you invisible. Speak up. Trust your gut. Demand the respect you've earned not just for yourself, but for every single person who might walk through that door after you. Hit that like button if you've faced similar walls, subscribe to join our community, and share your own stories in the comments below. Let's keep these conversations going, because when we stand together, the invisible walls begin to crumble.